Greetings, welcome to Bonepile Miniatures. You are looking at my Dwarf Army as it sits at 1,000 points. This is a very recent milestone that I have reached, and the purpose of this video is to pause and have a look at this army and see what I've done with it. Now, I recently uploaded a music slideshow for this army that you can find on my channel, and I recommend you checking that out. But this video is intended to be a tableside discussion, so this will be more of a casual pace. So I am actually building 6 different Warhammer Fantasy armies all at once, and this is the third army that has now reached the 1,000 point threshold. The 2 preceding armies before this one have been Bretonnia and the Tomb Kings, and I have videos about those armies on my channel as well. The 3 remaining armies are not far behind, and I will be producing feature videos for them soon. So I started the Warhammer Fantasy hobby during the 8th edition, which makes me a relative newcomer to the hobby. I started building Bretonnia first, and I consider them to still be my primary army, and then I began building the Tomb Kings, and then I eventually started building a Dwarf Army. And the reason that I've been building extra armies is to give myself alternative armies to play, or armies to play against under my own roof. Now, the first thing that I encountered when I started to build my Dwarf Army was that the creativity was very open-ended, and even more so than my other 2 armies. Dwarf models are widely available, and their story is so familiar to the medieval genre. I've probably read the background story to this army more than any other, and it is what you would expect. They are an ancient and hardy race that is in decline. They have had bad history with just about every other race in the Warhammer world, and they've been around for so long, and they have lost territory to just about all of them, at least the forces of destruction and chaos. And so it was really easy to fit a backstory of my own clan into the tapestry of dwarf lore. I call this army the Brimstone Army. They are represented by the colors red and black and silver. And I did write a short backstory for this army, and it is available on my blog at bonepileminiatures.com. It's only a few paragraphs long, and so it is a quick read, but the basic idea is that this clan has operated some silver mines high in the mountains for many generations. But their history is full of tragedy and triumph. There was a fateful day when a large meteor, or a star in their understanding, fell out of the sky and struck their mountain of silver. It caused great destruction of the mountain, and the mines, and their villages. Fires and chaos raged for months, and few dwarves survived. They get their clan name, the Brimstones, from this event. So the story I wrote includes a few more major events to their clan saga, and I won't get into all the details here, but they had their encounters with ratmen and orcs and other foul races as they tried to recover from their cataclysm. Through 1,000 years or more of trial and treachery, they are still clinging on to survival and are reaching a new pinnacle of success. So yeah, this is the Brimstone clan with red, black, and silver colors. So let's start with an overview of the units included in my army so far. So let's start with the front row on the left. And there we have 10 Slayers, and then in the middle we have 15 Quarrelers, and then next we have a Thane, and then on the right we have 20 Warriors. And then the back row on the left we have 10 Longbeards. In the middle there's a Bolt Thrower, and on the right there's 10 Hammerers. So this army only has one character so far, which is the Thane. So let's zoom in and have a closer look at him. So this is the Thane. His name is Rumar Trollbane. I found this model on the Reaper Miniatures catalog, and he is a metal model. Now you will notice right away that he does not wear the red and black colors of the Brimstone clan. And that's because this was the first dwarf model I painted, and I had not quite nailed down the color scheme yet. And aside from that, I imagined him wearing all metal armor, and I did not need to use the clan's colors on this model. So the reason that I selected this model was that I really like the double axes that he's carrying. He looks like a dwarf that just gets into the action and leads from the front. Dwarves are known for courage and stubbornness, and I think this model portrays all of that. I knew it had to be the Thane of my small, growing dwarf army. The next thing that I like about this model is his beard. I like that it's a normal-sized beard. I have to say that I'm not a fan of the utterly gigantic beards that I've seen on dwarf models of late, especially the ones coming out of Games Workshop. I prefer the more classic Warhammer look, with the normal dwarf-sized beards. Maybe a belly to knee-length beard is just about right for me. So this guy's beard is a little shorter than that, but I don't think it's too short. Maybe he's just a young dwarf and is a Thane by birthright, and he's out to prove himself to the clan. And overall, his appearance helps mix up the look of the clan and the dwarf image, so that we get the idea that dwarves come in many varieties of appearance. Now the trick with painting a model like this that has a lot of metal on him is to avoid having him appear monocolored. And so I did my best to give him at least 3 shades of metal armor to help break things up and allow you to see the different details and layers of the armor. Looking at his base, there's really nothing fancy about it. I've mentioned in my other videos that I'm more of a minimalist when it comes to bases. The bases for all the dwarves in my army depict something like mining rubble, with black rocks, or maybe it looks like coal. Either way, their bases reflect the environment of the mines where they spend most of their time. And so that's about it with the Thane. He's a pretty straightforward model. So let's move on to the next unit. And here is my unit of 20 dwarf warriors. They are equipped with hand weapons, armor, shields, and they have a full command. And these models come from the Games Workshop. And this was the first dwarf unit that I put together. And they were the first canvas for the army colors and design. When I was putting this together, I was very conscious of not using any white on these dwarfs. Otherwise, they might look like they came from Santa's village at the North Pole. Because if I switched the black color for white on their uniform, they would look like the North Pole Regiment. Imagine if I gave them all white beards too. That might actually be a fun idea to try. Maybe I could do one unit of these guys like that, just for fun. But I think the red and black looks great, and I think their colors fit well with the brimstone label. And I think the metallic silver garnishes these colors well. But there's gold in there too, because many mines produce multiple metals, minerals, and gems. And so there's some of that throughout their ranks. Now some people who have looked at my dwarf army have remarked that they like that they don't all have the same beard color. And that was actually a decision I made in the very beginning. I did not want all my dwarves to look the same, and so I tried to mix all the beard colors I could into the regiment. And speaking of variety, I am pleased with the great mix of hand weapons available in this kit. There's varieties of hammers and axes to help mix things up. Maybe the last thing to note here is that I do make my own movement trays. And I try to keep the same tray design throughout the entire army. That way I might be able to use them interchangeably between different units. And they have a simple design. There's the black rock with flecks of gold and silver that resembles the mining environment where they spend most of their lives. And I also make the movement trays magnetic, so that adds a little extra touch that can't be readily seen. I did not do any kind of modifications or anything really special to this unit. They were very fun to build, and they make a great unit for the dwarf army. And tactically they are the cheapest dwarf unit, and so therefore they are currently the largest unit of dwarfs in my army, as you will see shortly. And so I think that's going to sum up all I have to say on these dwarf warriors. And now we'll move on to the next unit. So the next unit I will talk about is the Quarrelers. And this is another core choice, similar to the warriors. But they all have crossbows, and there are 15 of them. And these are Games Workshop models. And I don't think shooting units always need much in the way of command models, but I made them anyways. Now looking at the models, they are actually very similar in appearance to the warriors, especially their clothing. They have the same layered chain mail with heavy coats, so I wanted to make sure that these dwarves looked a little differently than the warriors. And now if you recall from the warriors, they had red sleeves to their overcoats, and for these guys I painted their sleeves black. And so they have an overall darker look, and the only red is on their helmets and under the layer of their chainmail. I think one of my favorite parts to this unit is the hand-painted banner. I think it is a really great symbol of their clan, the Brimstone clan. So there's something like a silver river flowing out of a mountain pass with runes around it. And I like how the weathering turned out on it. It helps highlight the center of the image with the mountain. It kind of gives it a mystical glow, and I just thought that turned out really nice. And beyond that, I didn't do any major modifications to this unit, but I did a few fun little things. They're just minor, but I have this dwarf resting his arm on an upright crossbow, and then holding a hand weapon. And I think this is the champion model. And over here there's a dwarf holding a pipe. I could not resist putting a pipe in the unit. And I think the pipe is usually shown in the army book with the standard bearer. But I ended up giving the standard bearer a crossbow too. He probably has a secret third hand to operate the crossbow and hold the standard. Or maybe his secret is that he's figured out how to use his beard as a third hand. I don't know. Either way, that's what he's got. And then over on the far left, I have a dwarf balancing a mug of ale, along with his crossbow. Dwarves are always sneaking these simple pleasures of life into battle. Especially these gray-haired dwarfs. They aren't going to be told what they aren't allowed to bring to war, as they've survived many of them up to this point. So some of you probably already know that the kit used to make these quarrelers can also be used to build handgunners. So you may ask, why did I build quarrelers instead of handgunners? And so the reason is, when I went through the 8th edition background on the dwarves, there's mention that not all dwarf clans have adopted the use of gunpowder. Some try to remain more traditional in weaponry. And so I thought that the Brimstone clan would fit that ideology pretty well, since they are so rooted in their clan's tradition and history. So the plan for now is to not implement any black powder into this army. That includes the war machines too. So the plan is to not have cannons either. Now I'm not sure if that's a good idea or not yet. I'm not sure if I'll be able to hold to that commitment. But we'll see how competitive they are without the black powder. My guess is that they should be fine without it. But it is not a rule carved in stone, in case things don't go well. But for now we're going to go without it. And if at some point I must bring some black powder, maybe I'll portray them as units not from the Brimstone clan, but maybe some mercenaries from another dwarf clan or something like that. That seems like a fun approach if I must take that option. And so I might build some cannon and organ gun models at some point just to have them, but I might approach them from that different angle if they ever see any time on the battlefield. Another question you might ask is, what is the meaning of the unit of 15? Is there a reason for that number? Well, yes, the 15 are deliberate. Depending upon how many points you can sink into a unit, I think 15 models in a shooting unit are ideal. And that's mainly because of the shoot in 2 ranks rule. And you might think that due to that rule, 10 models are ideal. But I've been using 15 as my standard shooting unit size, if points allow. That's because I like to have a 3rd rank to make up for early unit attrition. So after the first few models perish, I have a third rank to fill in the gaps and still maximize the number of shots I can get off with that formation. And like I said, 1 or 2 ranks may be all that can be afforded in some cases, but a third rank helps buffer against the first few inevitable wounds in the early part of the skirmish. And the second benefit to a third rank is that if they get charged, shooting troops are often at a disadvantage at close combat. And having an extra rank may help with the combat resolution. So having 3 ranks to a shooting unit is a dual-purpose strategy. So I think that's enough talk about that one unit, the Quarrelers. And so now let's move on to the next one. And the next unit is the Longbeards. So here's the Longbeards. There's 10 dwarfs. They have great weapons and full armor. And they also have a full unit command. And these are Games Workshop models. So generally these dwarves are called Longbeards due to their season of life having seen many winters. They are considered the veterans, but I didn't actually paint them all with long gray hair, which seems to be the default approach. In this unit only one of them has gray hair, but 1 has red hair, 2 have brown hair, and 6 have black hair. Why didn't I give them all gray hair? Well, that's because not all veterans are old. That's a common misconception in life. Especially in wartime, you can have a lot of young veterans. So that's why I only gave them 1 model with gray hair. Let's look at the banner. Now this is not the best artwork, but it does depict their mountain of silver getting struck by a falling star, or a meteor. It's a simple image, but it was my first hand-painted emblem on a banner. Now I might come back and revisit this one someday and improve the shading and the weathering tone on it, but it still looks decent enough and represents the Brimstone clan well. So after looking at the warriors and the Quarrelers, these guys noticeably have tougher looking armor. It is full-bodied and more than just chainmail. And this is what distinguishes them from the other units. Now the kit used to make these guys is also used to make the Hammerers unit, so they will have some similar appearance. And the way that I have distinguished them is apparent when you set them side by side. For example, the Longbeards have mostly natural metallic looking armor. Their shoulder covers have an image with a black bearded dwarf on them, and that's on both shoulders. Now a kit of these guys comes with 10 models, and they only give you 10 of those shoulder pads with a Longbeard image on them. So in order to get those shoulder pads on both shoulders, I had to combine 2 kits to get enough of them. And besides that, there's nothing else really special about them. But there is a choice to give them different types of weapons, and I decided to go ahead and give them all great weapons, which are great axes, and they do look pretty intimidating when they're all together. And I only did one fun little modification to this group. The champion is holding a decapitated head, and to make that head I used the head of a Tomb King skeleton, and then that length of hair from its scalp is from a Dark Elf warrior kit. I glued those parts together to make something that looks like a zombie head. Now this is a pretty small unit of 10 Longbeards. Is there a reason for that unit size? Well, there's actually a couple of reasons. The kits I bought only come in boxes of 10. And I had 2 of these kits, and I used one of them to make the Longbeards, and the other kit to make the Hammerers. But the other reason is that these dwarfs have more expensive points costs. And so while building this dwarf army, it was pretty tough to make any bigger units than 10, while trying to stay at the same pace with my other Warhammer armies. It is much easier to add 20-man units to the Tomb Kings and Dark Elves than it was with these dwarves. But the plan is to get some more of these kits in the near future and build up these units beyond how they sit today. But this also creates an interesting dynamic in our games. The Dwarf Army has more but smaller units than my other armies, while everyone else has fewer but larger units. And it's interesting to see how they all match up on the battlefield with that composition. And I think that's all I'm going to talk about with this unit, the Longbeards. And so now let's move on with the next one. And that's going to be the Hammerers. And like I said before, these have a very similar appearance to the Longbeards coming from the same kit. They are also a unit of 10. They have great weapons, full armor, and they also have a full command. Now there are some differences that distinguish them from the Longbeards. First, they use different heads. They use the same bodies, but the heads are different. The Hammerers have flat top helmets, and their beards are not as long as the Longbeards. Big surprise there, right? Another big difference is obviously the weapons. These guys have warhammers, whereas the Longbeards have the great axes. These Hammerers also have different shoulder guards. Most of them depict hammer images, but as you can see, I painted their shoulder guards red to distinguish them even more. And I also painted their arm bracers red, whereas my Longbeards didn't have any colored armor. So those are all the differences. But now I'd like to make a note about the banner. And this is a pretty unique looking plaid banner. I was just toying around with this idea of a plaid banner, not totally serious about it. I approached it very fearfully and skeptically that I could even do it. But as I started to paint this plaid pattern, I started to realize that it was actually turning out pretty well. And so I kept it and I kept going. And when I was all done, I thought it looked pretty good. I wasn't necessarily trying to make some kind of Scottish dwarf regiment, just trying something different. And I thought the experiment was a keeper. And I think it's a pretty cool looking banner. And I tend to get a lot of comments about it. Now, one extra nice thing about this unit is the double strikes that they get. And even though it is a smaller unit like the Longbeards, it hits like one twice its size. Now this is the champion model. He is holding an orc enemy's head that's been decapitated, and that was just an extra part that I had laying around. But there's nothing else really special that I did with these guys. They are a really nice unit to have on the battlefield, and I intend to add more of them in the near future. So let's move on from here. Now we come to the Slayers unit. And once again, this is a small unit of 10 dwarfs. They have hand weapons and a full command. And these models are a kit from the Avatars of War brand. So the reason that I didn't go with the Games Workshop kit was just personal preference in how the models look. I thought there was a lot more variety in appearance with this Avatars of War kit. The old Slayer models from Games Workshop are hard to find, and the new ones just don't speak to me. Like I said earlier, I'm not a fan of the huge exaggerated beards of some of the newer models. Sometimes they just remind me of Cousin It from the Addams Family more than a dwarf. And you will notice that despite all tradition, I did not paint all their hair orange. I've got 2 gray hairs, 2 shaved heads, some blonde hairs, some brown, and some are multicolored. And the way I look at it, these guys are the berserker unit of the dwarfs. They remind me of renegades, like the Hells Angels of the dwarfs. They don't have any kind of strict code of dress or appearance. Nobody's going to tell these guys what to do. They do whatever they want. So you're going to find a little bit of everything in this group. So a big distinguishing characteristic of this unit is that they are all shirtless. They are minimalists, even for weaponry. They only carry hand weapons. They have no armor or shields. They are kind of like a kamikaze group, yet they can be resoundingly successful. But they do look extreme as far as dwarf standards of appearance go. But no two of these guys take the same approach. Every one of them has a unique set of weapons, tattoos and scars, body paint, beards, and hairstyles. and this unit has a total of 3 decapitated heads in it. 2 are from orcs and 1 from a giant. And I'm not sure I could say I have a favorite model in this unit, but there's a few that stand out to me. And I actually modified the banner quite a bit. If you look at the box for this kit, the standard was supposed to have 2 dragon heads held by a dwarf effigy, 1 dragon head in each of his outstretched arms. But I ended up using that dwarf effigy in the unit to make a regular model, and that's the guy holding the 2 orc heads. I made that modification for 2 reasons. The first was to employ just a little extra variety into the unit, making a guy with both arms stretched out, and those orc heads were available in the parts kit. The second reason I modified the banner was that I thought that the original design of the banner was just way too large, especially considering that this is a unit of minimalists. It seemed odd for them to have the largest standard in the army, and I thought that a small standard was a better fit for them. But that's just my point of view, but I do like how it all turned out, and the dragon head is just fitting to me for a Slayer unit. And so that's all I've got about this Slayer unit. And now the next unit we're going to talk about is the Bolt Thrower unit. And this was really a fun project to put together. This is a metal model from Games Workshop, and there's 3 crewmen. Excellent models and very fun to paint. This war machine is embellished in all the colors of the Brimstone clan, and the whole unit is pretty heavy. I had to put more than 1 magnet on the bolt thrower in order for it to stick properly enough to the movement tray. I like all my models and movement trays to pass an upside down test. That way I know that they are stable. And amazingly, I got this one to work. I also added a magnet to the release lever of the bolt thrower that the shirtless dwarf is operating, and that magnetizes to the body of the war machine. That way I can make sure that the handle properly aligned to the machine and it looks like there is a part of it. The neat thing about this model is that the base stays stationary and the body can pivot up and down freely. There is a little pivot cam that allows it to do that. So the nice thing about magnetizing the crank handle of the war machine is that the magnet automatically adjusts the pivot of the bolt thrower to match the height of the dwarf holding it. Otherwise, without the magnet, they would be slightly misaligned, and the crank handle would not look like it was a part of the machine. So I ended up using the magnetic option to solve that problem. The other question I had about this unit was that I wasn't really sure about what to do for the dimensions of the movement tray. I decided to put the whole unit with the crew on 1 tray, and then make the dimensions as small as possible. At first I wasn't sure if the crew should not be included on the tray, and that only the war machine itself should be on the tray. But I ultimately decided to have them all fit onto the same tray. The movement tray is technically considered as a part of the unit, and so the unit's footprint is increased with this approach. Each corner of the tray has about a 1-inch void that is not being used. So essentially, the entire 3-man crew could line up on any flank and front the enemy. So I thought that that would make sense since the entire crew is considered a target when an enemy unit is in base contact with the war machine. So if it happened to be a 4-man crew, then using this approach I would have made each flank be 4 inches in order to accommodate a close combat scenario. At least that's how I arrived at the conclusion to build it at that size. And I think it makes sense. I also wanted to make sure the whole unit could sit on 1 tray for easier deployment to the battlefield. And with that, I can point out thus far that I am sticking with my commitment to no gunpowder in this army. Like I said, I don't know if I can hold to that commitment in the long run, but we are going to try. And I think I can do this and still win some games. But only time will tell. And so that's all I've got for the bolt thrower unit. And that brings us to the end of this discussion on my Dwarf Army. And I can't wait to get these guys out onto the battlefield. I'm looking forward to adding some more units to this army very soon, and I can't wait to see how this army evolves over time. The Brimstone clan has a lot of grudges to settle, and I can't wait to see how things play out on the battlefield. So I hope you enjoyed this tableside chat of my dwarf army, and I will post another video like this when I reach another milestone, and we will see what changes I have made at that point. And I would like to remind you that you can get more information about this army at my hobby blog at bonepileminiatures.com. You can go there to read the background story that I wrote about this army. I also have a tutorial that I have written about how I build my movement trays. And so if you would like to see how I do that, you can go to my blog and check it out. But that's all I have for now. So thanks for watching this episode, and I will see you on the next one.